Chapter 8, The Field Manual. In April 2022, Baguio Christ Centre Churches held their annual anniversary in Baguio City, where Beth read an account of the brief history of Baguio Christ Centre Churches, and they celebrated. Here is the video 30. A brief history of Christ-centered churches. Like all the works of God, they begin in the mind of God, and history unfolds these good purposes predestined to be fulfilled in Jesus Christ. Here is the testimony of William Ola Pollard relating the brief history of Christ-centered churches.
Before returning to the city of Baguio after my release from my incarceration in August 2002, we have a chance to meet with Reverend David Clark and company. The consensus of our meeting was to send me as the first Trojan horse missionary to start a pioneering work to the prisons in the northern part of the country. Well, I took this given opportunity so I could start a ministry in our city. Likewise, to share the gospel to my families, relatives, and friends. In due course, I started the prison ministry with the assistance of my wife, who became a born-again Christian at that time. She was baptized by Reverend Lucas Dangatan Jr. in the latter part. To start my ministry, I have to write letters of request to the jail wardens of the city in the province about my concern to the inmates.
Here is the recommendation which strongly supports the work of Trojan Horse International Christian Ministries within Baguio City Jail. In the prison. We're very blessed indeed. There they are. And here is the letter of request that we should enter the prison and take the video recorder, and we have the recommendation by the prison warden himself. His name is Julian O. Mangomac Jr., Jail Superintendent, City Jail Warden. There we are. The schedules to take place at Baguio City Jail. Here we are. For the whole week. And there we have Trojan Horse Mission.
By God's providence, my letters were given due cognitions by the head of the institutions. This led us with my wife to start ministering to the inmates inside the jails respectively. Later, I informed Reverend David Clark about God's work in prison and how God is mightily using us. This moved them to come and visit the work and also help us minister to the inmates at the Baguio City Jail and Provincial Jail. Their arrival was truly a blessing. Through their preaching of the gospel, lots of the inmates came to believe in Jesus Christ and committed themselves to undergo water baptism inside the jails. After a week of staying with us, the group went back to Manila in January 2003, and we continued the ministries that God has entrusted to us. In 2003, that year, we started a small church under the name Baguio Christ Centered Church Incorporation, or BCCCI, within the city. Dr. Lucas Dangatan Jr. and I partnered with the work. Dr. Lucas is the founder and president of the Jeriwal Institute of Theology inside the Bureau of Correction. The first thing we did was to reach out to family members of my former inmates who are still confined in prison. We conducted a house-to-house weekly Bible studies to them. By the grace of God, many of them were enlightened and committed themselves to the church. They were the first family members of the BCCCI. After some time, Dr. Lucas went back to Manila to continue his ministerial work inside the Bureau of Corrections. I serve as the pastor of the BCCCI, with a zeal teaching our church members to grow spiritually. In 2004, I decided to continue my theological pursuit for a higher degree and at the same time doing my pastoral work. It was during this year that my previous knowledge about monergistic teachings and sovereignty of God had been systematized. As a result, this led me to change my theological perspectives, most especially on the doctrine of salvation. The prevalence of Arminianism from many churches around the city eventually challenged me to open the Christ-Centered Theological School or the CCTS at the same year. The school adheres to a Reformed doctrine and is given free purposely to spread the Reformed doctrines into cater ministries and Christians, the ministers who cannot afford to enroll in an expensive seminary. By the grace of God, many of them graduated from our theological school and are now mightily being used by God today. Glory to God for that. In 2005, God continually blessed His work on us. He led us to open another jail ministry at the Bureau of Jail Management and Penology or BJMP at La Trinidad Benguet. The BCCCI are now ministering to these 3 jails. In 2006, the Camog Christ-Centered Church or the KCCC in Sablan, Benguet came into existence, pioneered by Pastors Nardo and Pastor Glenn, alumni of CCTS who have graduated 2 years course diploma in theology. In 2008, another church followed, the Pinsal Christ-Centered Church or the PCCC. The church was being pioneered by Reverend Aladin Cayasben, who is also a Bachelor in Theology, a graduate of the Christ-Centered Church Theological School. In 2009, the BCCCI sent Pastor Mario Binyahan and sister wife for a mission in Nueva Ecija. By God's guidance and provision, they were able to establish the Villa Floresta Christ-Centered Church or the VCCC in San Jose, Nueva Ecija. Pastor Mario is also formerly one of the faculty members of the CCTS who was sent for a missionary work. In 2010, the BCCCI was registered under the SEC registration CN 2010-27319. This registry ensures all the Christ-Centered churches that is under the umbrella of the Baguio Christ-Centered Church Incorporation or the BCCCI. During these years, we continually experience God's tremendous spiritual blessings upon BCCCI and the CCTS. Souls were added into the church and many have graduated from our school. Christ-centered churches were being established around the archipelago. Moreover, God also moved a sister to sponsor a radio program for BCCCI to preach the gospel on air that lasted for almost a decade. Though crossroads, of course, trials, difficulties in others were inevitably in our ministerial works, yet we consider them as mere blessings in parts of our calling. In 2012, the Muntinlupa Christ-Centered Church or the MCCC also came into existence. The church is started by Reverend Dante Marcus, a former inmate at the medium security compound. The outset of his pioneering work existed just after his release from prison. The following year, 2013, I started to organize the Prisons of Christ Organization Philippines or the POCOP. This is a group of Christian ex-convicts released from incarceration and who are now serving the Lord from the different places around the country. The primary purpose of this organization is to help Christian ex-convicts to usher them into a Christian church within their community. This group also conducts an annual assembly where all its members come together for fellowship and sharing the Word of God entrusted to them and also sharing their works that God has entrusted to them. Today, the POCOP has a huge membership all over the Philippines, of which I serve as their president. In 2014, another inmate by the name Pastor Elton, whom I have been helping process his paper, was also released from prison. Just after his release, I encouraged him to start a ministry in Las Piñas at his residential place. By God's providence, the Las Piñas Christ-Centered Church was brought forth. He is now pastoring the LPCCC. In 2015, a year after Pastor Fred Batak informed me of having started a church in Aborlon, Palawan. Palawan is an island located along the Visayas Islands. We prepared to fly on air to see the work of God that He started. We enjoyed fellowshipping with them. We stayed there for a week and also joined them in their outreach ministries inside the penal colonies. Afterwards, I ordained him as a licensed minister and installed some of the elders of the church. To date, Pastor Fred is pastoring the Aborlan Christ-Centered Church, or the ACCC. In 2018, Pastor Paulis Perez started also a ministry at his wife's place in Lubao, Pampanga. He called me up and wanted to affiliate the church that he started. We went to visit him and met his family members and the members of the church. This church was later named as Lubao Christ-Centered Church, or the LCCC, in Pampanga. During the following years, we also extended our theological school to other places in the northern part of the country through mobile schooling. And by God's grace and providence, many ministers and Christians were taught and eventually adhered to the biblical teachings on the sovereignty of God. Until now, despite of this global pandemic, God continued to work in our midst. Outreaches and mission churches were being opened by God through us. To name some of our mission churches, we have the Ambassador Christ-Centered Church Mission, ACCMC of Tublay, the Mines View Christ-Centered Mission Church, or the MVCCCMC, headed by Reverend Chris Arpon, the Sayangan Christ-Centered Mission Church, or the SCCMC, headed by Reverend John Wayne, and the Apayao Christ-Centered Mission Church, also headed by Pastor Salas Sabadao. As we look back through all these years, we can really imagine the graciousness of God bestowed upon us. His huge works entrusted to us is conceivably beyond our reach. But I believe that nothing is impossible before a sovereign God. Just as the Apostle Paul says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, Philippians 4:13. Brothers and sisters, the history of the Baguio Christ-Centered Church by our Reverend Bishop William Pollock Sr. To God be all the glory. Narrator Lilibeth Marquez. Thank you so much.
Following the events and progress of the work being conducted in the northern Philippines by those connected with Christ-Centered Churches Incorporated, take a look at the proposed field manual that I've requested William Pollock to compile, which I believe will be a great help to the next generation of believers. Here is the video 30, Trojan Warrior Field Manual. Trojan Warrior Field Manual, in progress. It was due to the good reports sent to me in England during the past 20 years by William, and being informed of the number of outreach churches being established in the northern Philippines, I was greatly encouraged and was moved to republish and make available Dr. John Gill's body of doctrine on practical divinity, which, along with Louis Berkhof's systematic theology, they might be fully equipped to promote and further the cause of Christ. I sent the 5-volume set in January 2021, and since William has established firsthand the Baguio Christ-Centered Church and several Christ-Centered churches in the various parts of the Philippines, it seems reasonable for William to set in order a reliable account and the steps he took to commence the work that has been established starting from his first leaving the prison in August 2002 to the present time. He has already mentioned the need to correctly present monergistic theology, that is the Reformed view of salvation as expressed in Louis Berkhof's work and Dr. John Gill's body of doctrinal and practical divinity, and I felt that an historic account of how he, upon his release from prison, was able to gain access to the prisons of Baguio City and Benguet provincial jails was needed. How he was able to speak to the inmates and teach them the gospel And how did he realise some inmates were ready to receive the gospel and be baptised? Also, how did he continue the work in teaching the various truths of the Christian religion to prison inmates? Then, how did he commence the formation of Baguio Christ-Centred Church? I was greatly encouraged by William's testimony that he sent me his book called From Darkness into His Marvellous Light, which I feel should be included in an appendix to this manual. In so doing, relate any errors that he has encountered and corrected in order to ensure the hearers were not infected by the false teachings relating to the gospel truths such as Arminianism, the function of men and women in the church, and false prophecies, or the rolling and falling on the floor and other false religious expressions. And also, the method taken to ensure singing of hymns, psalms and spiritual songs were established in such a way the song content were free from doctrinal errors. This purpose of the manual being to assist future ministers who upon their release from prison or being sent by the church might have some guidelines and help from someone who had gone before them. God willing, the manual will be forthcoming.